Greetings, our Frederick Riddle here. Once again, this is probably the last time I'm going to do it with this setup. So I wanted to just remind you about it. I'm enjoying it. Probably going to leave it up through New Year's and then take it down. But this has been an interesting time. I've never done this before, what we're doing. It's been a first time for me. I really enjoyed going through Christmas Day, and there's so much more than what I've been able to cover. The days right after his birth, presentation at the temple, and things of this nature. So I've been hitting the nativity scene for the most part, and now we're going to be a little bit beyond that, and this will probably be the last time. I might change my mind, but as it stands right now, this is the last one dealing with the Christmas, and I'm going to move on back into my normal studio and start talking about the news of the day again. We are talking about the news of the day of that day, and let me get my Bible here. As before, I've said I'm not a preacher and I'm not preaching. This is reporting the news to you, the Christian news, from a Christian viewpoint. The world has its own way of interpreting things that happened. I'm trying to give you a Christian overall view here. And in in Matthew chapter 2, beginning with verse 13, if you're following, 13 through, well, actually, the whole thing, what we're going to be talking about today, goes through chapter 2, verse 13 through 23. But I'm only going to read to you the very first part here. The Magi have come, they've worshipped, they've given the gifts, which we've already covered, the meaning of the gifts and the preparation and all that. And then they were warned to leave and not to go back to Herod. And we've covered that. Well, now we pick up what happens after that. And when they, the Magi, were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeareth to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. And that is a situation that we find. I call this the flight. Flight into Egypt, if you will, but it's the flight because it covers more than just the flight into Egypt. So what has happened is Herod, if you remember, Herod had inquired of them as to where this child was, and they were supposed to report back to him. But when they did not report back to him, Herod, not a dumb man, figured it out that he didn't figure out the part about God warning him. I don't think he even believed in God. But he felt that they had mocked him, that they certainly were not treating him with respect. And he believed, correctly so, that they had left and gone back to their homeland without telling him. Well, he already knew the location. And he had figured out, based on what they had told him about the star and everything, and his own scribes, they had figured it out that it was Bethlehem. And so he knew where, and he knew approximately how many years it had taken. Up to 2 years possibly. So what he did is he sent his troops into Bethlehem and slew all the children 2 years and younger, and it may have included children not yet born. So, that would have caused the death of the mothers themselves. And so, this is all Herod trying to protect his throne. He was very jealous of his being a ruler, the king. Now you got to remember, he is not a Jew himself. He's an Edomite. He was appointed by the Romans, so the Jewish people had no stock in him whatsoever. And so he was very paranoid, if you will, feeling that everybody was out to get him. So his simple solution was do unto your enemies what they want to do unto you. Basically what his rule was. And he was going around killing them. And he didn't care if they were relatives. He would kill them if he deemed them as some threat to his rule. So, and by the way, I'm not going to cover this today, but it wasn't very long after all these events have taken place that Herod himself died. Why? Because he did not give God the glory. He was given a speech, and people extolled him and said, "Oh, you speak like a god," and so on and so forth. He accepted it, and he died as a result of a rather horrible death when you look at the description. And some descriptions, he was eaten by worms. So just the whole thing just, I wouldn't advise you reading that or studying that just before dinner time, because it's going to turn your stomach. But the thing is that the stage had been set. Right after the Magi left, Herod sent the troops in to kill. So God, to protect Jesus, had Joseph visited him in a dream. Had an angel, actually, he didn't, but an angel of the Lord visited Joseph in a dream and warned him and said, go to Egypt. And so this is where we pick up the story. Now, remember all those gifts? Now we start to see these coming together, because these gifts represent money. Look at some of the things that we have to do. First of all, he had to get a small caravan. I mentioned before, I believe, that there was probably a fee for joining. You just walk up and say, I want to join your caravan, and hitch up your wagon and follow. It wasn't, I think you had to bargain with them and probably come up with some kind of a fee structure or something just to compensate those people, because they had to now take into consideration, they now had a bigger caravan, had to plan maybe a little bit different and so forth as what they were going to do. And so this is probably a small caravan as opposed to the one that the Magi had, but it's still a caravan. So here's where some of the gifts to finance that trip would have gone for. Joining the caravan I just mentioned. How about this? Buying or renting clothing, food, and animals to carry supplies. Now you got to remember, Joseph and Mary were poor. They didn't have much money up until the Magi came and provided for them. So, but we find them with all this money or valuables that could be converted into money, but they didn't have any personal belongings other than perhaps the clothing on their backs, and maybe a change or a garment, or a couple of changes of garment, and that was probably it. So they needed to prepare. So I don't believe that Joseph got up that night and fled. I think it took him a couple of nights, because as soon as he got up in the morning, he went to work. And I don't mean work at the carpentry shop. I meant he went to work getting what he needed. He had to go and contact and see about joining a caravan, and there was possibly caravans going through that area. So he would have been on a time schedule. He would have had to do it. So I'm thinking this thing probably took about 24 hours altogether. And so the day after the dream, he needed to get in contact with a caravan. And then he had to go and buy some clothes. Going to Egypt might have had, that's a different climate, so he may have had to buy clothes in preparation for that. They certainly had to buy clothes for the baby. They had to go and probably buy animals. I don't think they had rent a camel. Can you imagine that one? Hertz rent a camel. But no, I don't think they had that. I think they would have had to buy. And then so they bought these animals to make the trip. At least one camel and some donkeys. And then, like I said, clothing. They would have had to have some food. The caravan would not have been responsible for feeding them. They would have had to provide their own food and stuff. So this is all eating up the money right away, starting to eat it up. So they made the trip. Now that's not a fast trip. It's not as long as the Magi had, but now they're traveling from Jerusalem, actually Bethlehem, and going down south to Egypt. And remember, I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a road there that goes up along the coast, and it's a sort of a military road, and there are a lot of forts along on that road. It's an Egyptian road. However, I would think, the Bible doesn't go into this, but I would think that Joseph, making his plans, would have wanted that caravan to avoid those forts, because although they were Egyptian, perhaps, at this time Rome was in power, and Egypt was just like Israel was sort of under the Roman rule there, and so Herod's reach would have been far beyond his normal reach. He had the Roman Roman resources, if you call it that he might have, and he may have sent word, watch for anybody coming. He wouldn't have known about them going to Egypt, but he would have closed all roads leading away from Bethlehem, and the search for anybody, especially babies 2 years or younger. And so we don't know all the details of that flight, but common sense tells us that Joseph would have tried to avoid contact with Roman soldiers, Egyptians, other Jewish soldiers, so anything that would have tipped the king off to where they were and where they were heading. And so they made their way down to Egypt. They apparently didn't have any trouble, so we won't go any further than that on the trip. When they got to Egypt, now they had a new problem. Where are they going to stay? Well, when they first got there, they probably, being in a caravan, probably stayed in the caravan. But eventually a caravan is going to break up. In my mind, I think of a caravan like a wagon train of our Old West days. They came together for a purpose, traveled west, got to their location, and then broke up with people going in different directions. Now, I may be totally wrong on that, but that's how it works in my mind, how I'm thinking. And so they got to Egypt. And so maybe a day or two they were all together, but then they started breaking off, one going this direction, one going this direction, and so forth, whatever their plan was. Well, Joseph had to find a place for his family. He had a trade. One thing about being a carpenter was a skill. And he probably had whatever tools he probably had them with him. And so he could set up shop just about anywhere he wanted to. And so, and then hope that people needed his skills. So he's still using that money, and so he finds a place where he can stay in Egypt. And being as how Goshen is up there in the northern part, I wouldn't be surprised that he stayed there, which if he was up on his history at all, it would have brought back thoughts of the history of the Jewish people who had once been slaves in Egypt, who had once lived right there in Goshen. So all sorts of things, and if I was writing a book about this, and who knows, I might someday, that would be something I might explore, the very idea of being back in the land where your people your ancestors had once lived, served, and died. Or, if they were in times of the Exodus, had left and headed and come to where he now called home, which would have been Nazareth, of course. Well, actually, no, Bethlehem at this point, because he'd been there for 2 years, so that's long enough to call it home. So they stayed there in Egypt. And then the word finally came, after a period of time went by, that Herod had died. Remember I told you he died shortly afterwards. How shortly afterwards, I'm not, that part, I did not look that up. So it could have been a good time because he not only took time to go in Bethlehem and kill all the babies. Then he had that speech, which took place later, and so we're talking months, if not years, later. And so, but he died, and the kingdom, his kingdom, was divided by Rome amongst his sons. I'm going to get into that. But word came back to Joseph that it was safe now to return. At least part of that word would have been from the reappearance of an angel. But he might have gotten information from other sources as well. And so, but once God told him to return, he returned and headed, and he didn't go back to Bethlehem. In his mind, this is why I said this earlier, while he had lived 2 years, and that was his home, his real home in his heart and his mind was Nazareth. And you can identify with that, I'm sure. We have where we spend our early years, where we spent our life for a while. I've been down here in Florida since 2008, and I still have good thoughts about Michigan. Do I want to return? Not really. I have learned to love Florida, but there's still a lot of things that I miss about Michigan. And so there's that tug on your heart. And the tug on his heart, I'm saying, was Nazareth. So when they got word to go back, that's where they went. And God may have, I'm not sure, I didn't read this or look this up, but God may have actually said Nazareth. But in any case, that's where God led them. Because just as the Magi were following a star, Joseph was following the guidance of God. Not a star or anything physical like that, but God was guiding him along the way. And we don't know all the appearances that may have happened or ways in which God would have directed him. But he just didn't get up and just go. He was following God. This is a man who trusted and loved God, which probably, I would think, is why God chose him in the first place. God chose Mary because of her heart and because she loved God. Well, it stands to reason that he chose Joseph for the same reason. And so now they're heading back to home. All this cost money that they normally would not have had. And they used all that, just about all that money up. All those treasures that were brought to them. We don't know the value because it wasn't just one box of incense or one box of gold or one box of myrrh. It was multiple boxes, multiple chests or whatever it was carried in. And so it represented a fortune. But that fortune was diminished. Like, as a carpenter, I think I've told you this before, it was not profitable. It was profitable in the sense that it would provide them a living. But for somebody to get rich on, it was not something you got rich at doing. And so they needed all this. They needed this money because these were extra expenses beyond their normal family expenses. And so it took a lot of money. So they went down to Egypt, they stayed in Egypt, and then they went back to Nazareth, which is where Jesus grew up. And at the age of 12, that's when a Jewish boy becomes a man. And that's why they took him to the temple. And it was sort of a graduation, I guess you could think of it. But he became a man. He's still a son, still a child, still under the authority of his parents, but now he can participate, probably in the councils of the men. More than likely, he sat and listened, being respectful of those who were aged, or aged, I should say. And it wasn't, but when they went to the temple, that's when he made his move and started doing the work of God at the age of 12. Now, it's true he didn't begin his ministry until he was 30, but he began taking those steps. If you want to call them baby steps or child steps or however you want to call them, he took those first steps into a ministry. And his mother and father were watching and paying attention because they had not forgotten that it was God. He was God's son, not Joseph. Joseph was a stepdad, but he loved his stepson. And we don't know when Joseph died, but he did sometime before Jesus began his ministry at the age of 30. So, bringing this whole period of time to a conclusion. So, we have seen that Jesus was probably born in mid-September, was first seen by shepherds when he was born. Then 2 years later, the Magi followed them, and then came the flight to Egypt. Did to stay in Egypt, and now he got back to Nazareth. This demonstrates to us the providence of God, the foreknowledge of God. God is not a God that forces people to love him. He won't force you to love him. He won't force you to surrender to him. But he will interact with you. He will interact with humanity. And sending his son was part of that interaction, a major part of that interaction. And so when this whole story that was orchestrated was not God playing it by ear. Was not God saying, "Oh man, well here comes the king. I better get Joseph out." No, he knew all this, had it all planned well in advance before the foundations of the earth were ever laid. That the Magi would come, bring the treasures, so that Joseph, Mary, and little Jesus could go to Egypt, spend some time there, and then go back. Actually, going back to Nazareth. He had that all planned out. Joseph and Mary had to live it out, but he had it all planned in advance. That shows you the foreknowledge and the providence of God. So, what does that mean for you and me? What lesson can we get from this? Now, I'm getting a little preachy, I know. But the thing is this. If God can conceive, plan, and work out complicated or complex, I should probably use that word, details like he did in the birth and the flight into Egypt and then the return and all that, our lives are simple compared to all that. He knows everything about me. He's given me a little bit of a vision. Every day I'm seeking to know more about that vision. This presentation, this podcast is part of that vision. I don't understand all of that. I'm still learning how to do a podcast. But the thing is this, God is behind the whole thing. He has it all planned out. My job is to follow him. To trust him, to obey him. And then just watch and see how he works. He is a wonderful God. And so that is our look at Christmas. I don't know about you, but I've enjoyed this time. I've enjoyed doing it. But I'm also looking forward to getting back to reporting the daily news. And so that's my plan right now. Unless the Lord lays something else on my mind, that's how we're going to do it. Tomorrow I'll be back in the studio, and I'll be back once again bringing you the Christian perspective on the daily news. And there are always things. We're getting closer and closer to President-elect Trump becoming President Trump. We are already into even closer to a new year. A new year quite often is a time of refreshing, renewal, a time in which people make promises and things of this nature to themselves more than anybody else. We make recommitments. I'm looking to the new year so as I can look back at this past year. It's been a fast year for me, but there's been a lot of some high water marks. And I'm excited about what God is doing in my life and in my business, in my ministry, or I should say ministries, because I have a ministry at the church. I have a ministry here through TR Independent Books, and so I'm looking forward to that. Speaking of TR Independent Books, they are TR Independent Books is the sponsor of both my podcasts. This one here, Christian News and Views, and also my other podcast called Becoming a Published Author is Fun. Both are free. Both are different. This one here reports on the news with a Christian worldview, or you could even say a Christian twist. The other one is based on the idea of somebody. Everybody has a story to tell, and some of people want to put it in writing and maybe even sell it and try to see if they can make some money out of it. Well, you need to know how to write, and once you know that, you need to write the story, edit it, get it prepared and everything, and get it published. Now, I have a course that I've written and I sell. It's located at trbookservices.com, which is where that's the website for TR Independent Books. It's called Basic Authors Training, or BAT, B-A-T. I also have ministry publishing. No matter where you serve in your local church, if you're a Christian and you're serving God in your local church, then I'm interested in publishing your book. So that's all I'm going to say about that, but I am going to say about this channel. It is free. I just told you the TR Independent Books is sponsoring this. Well, down below you have the option to subscribe to this channel, and you get, my understanding of this is that you get everything I do on YouTube. Well, what I do on YouTube right now is I do a podcast. This podcast is Christian News and Views, and I have the other podcast, Becoming a Published Author is Fun, which, by the way, it is, and where you get free advice that you can use now, and if you use it now, it can help transform you a little bit. Not nearly as much as my course, but it will provide you with tools you can use right now, today. And so just subscribe, and you'll be able to have access to whatever I do on YouTube. You can also follow me, and when you do that, then notifications will go to your email box. Well, that's it for today. Tomorrow, well, actually, this is Friday, so our next episode will be on Monday, and I will look forward to meeting with you in that particular episode. I'm looking forward to it. You have a great day, and well, I'll be talking to you on Monday and Tuesday, and then comes New Year's Day. So get your things planned. Maybe make some plans for next year. It might be a good time just to look back and see how your year has gone, see what you can learn from it, apply it to your future. I don't care what job you're doing, or even if you're in retirement. It's always a good thing to look back, learn from your successes and your mistakes, and go from there. But whatever you do, trust in the Lord and trust Him to guide and direct you. You have a great day, and I'll see you in the next episode.